One man who is very aware of how influence works is our next speaker, Sir Martin Sorrell. I know from personal experience, he's always been brilliant at making his case at critical moments, often through newspapers. And when I was a journalist on Campaign and then the Sunday Times, I saw just how well Martin understood the influence that newspapers had. At that time, Martin was just starting to build WPP into the biggest marketing services group in the world, overtaking his former employers, Saatchi & Saatchi. He is now called on for his opinion on everything from politics and economics to his favourite pancake topping. Martin is one of the two longest-serving CEOs in the FTSE and runs an organisation that controls an extraordinary 75 billion of media spend. And he told us last week, I was pleased to hear, that he still downloads the Times and the Wall Street Journal app on his iPad every day. I don't think that there's anyone in the audience today that hasn't been directly influenced by Martin's behaviour. Whether you work for him, compete with him, or compete for revenue from one of his companies, his influence has a direct bearing on the day-to-day lives of all of us here. But what we're going to hear about today is not so much his views on the influence of media, but how he became a person of influence, how you earn influence, and the people and experiences that have influenced him. Martin is going today to be interviewed by one of the newest and youngest editors we have, who described himself to me last week as overweight and overpromoted, neither of which are true. Amal Rajan from The Independent. So I'm delighted that you're both here. Please, can you come up onto the stage and give them a warm welcome? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For those who noticed that your left eye is damaged, I had nothing to do with it.
Right, so this is...
We did not have a punch-up in the green room.
Well, we nearly did.
Maybe after we will, but no.
I should say two things by way of introduction. One is that although I'm editor of The Independent, I work for ESI Media, which is, as you know, the coolest company in town. We also have the Evening Standard, Independent on Sunday, and London Live, which Martin Sorrell was a big fan of, so you should invest vast sums in it.
Did you say about over-promoted or exaggeration?
Exaggeration.
Maybe it's
and
exaggeration.
the second thing, briefly, God, he likes to talk, doesn't he? The second thing, briefly, is somehow, inexplicably, and for the first time in my life, I developed an extremely painful eye infection last night, which means I can't see out of my left eye. So I'm not going to ignore you on this side of this stage, but also, occasionally I sort of appear to be crying profusely. And as I did just now, when we met...
The tears pour down his orange tie. The black spots all down the orange tie.
It really has got nothing to do with the emotional purchase of what Sir Martin says. It's because I'm in some pain. But anyway, let's talk briefly about influence and then open it to you guys, and I'll come back with some questions towards the end. Martin, let's start off by asking, what's been the biggest influence to you in the world of business?
Very simple, actually. My dad, that sounds all sort of apple pie and motherhood, or apple pie and fatherhood, but probably my father, actually, because I had a very, very close relationship with him. He died in 1989, but up to that point in time, and we started WPP in 85, and we had done two so-called hostile transactions, one in 87 with a company which was 13 times our size, JWT, and then a company in 89 which was double our size, and my father died shortly after that, July the 1st of 89. So, and I used to talk to him. I mean, it's bizarre, actually, when I think about it. I used to talk to him about, I would say, 4 or 5 times a day, because, he was probably the only person that I regarded that didn't have an agenda other than my own, right? Because, most of the people... I remember when we took over JWT, Bert Manning we installed as the CEO. Don Johnson had kicked Bert Manning out about a year or so before, and Bert was his appointed... Well, it was felt that he was the successor. And I remember Bert and others at JWT always used to say, about this, they had an agenda. Everybody inside JWT had an agenda. And I suppose that influenced me to some extent, although that came later on from 87 onwards. But I always felt my father was on my side. He could always give me objective advice. By the way, that didn't mean that he didn't criticize what I did, but he would always give me a good set of advice. So I say my dad, again, it sounds trite, but it's true.
But both your dad and your mum have forebears that came from Eastern Europe.
Yes, I would not have passed, I would not be here, which a lot of people think is a good thing, if there had been a point system at that point in time. An immigration point system. My grandparents would probably not have made it.
Do you think the current immigration point system is bad for business?
Well, I think if you think about, we had a session with Michael Porter a few days ago on his social index that he's propagating at the moment. And he's been just doing, at HBS, at Harvard Business School, and with the US government, he's been setting up these competitiveness indexes, which are more the hard numbers as opposed to the soft ones of social. And then you look at all the factors. If there were 6 things that countries have to do to be competitive, one of them would be stimulating immigration. Not letting this ridiculous thing that you have in this country, and particularly in the US, is that you bring bright young Chinese or Russians or Brazilians or Indians into the US, you educate them, and then they can't get green cards. They have to go back home, which is ridiculous, right? So you made this big investment in them, and then they go off. So do I think immigration is important? Yes, I do. I mean, we did a program, I remember a few weeks ago, we did a little mock-up. Chris Wade, who works with me at WPP on communications, did a mock-up of an ad, if there were no immigrants and you cross out Winston Churchill, Boris Johnson, et al., all people that would not be here because
Amal Rajan,
Martin Sorrell. I don't know how many people in the audience, but who are blue bloods and who are not. I don't know.
Of your grandparents, they came from places as far away as Kiev, Romania, Hungary.
Yeah.
Has that sort of inheritance been an influence on your life, and the fact that you felt you should in some way work harder because you're luckier than perhaps your forebears had?
Well, I do. Just sort of I think it's an interesting story. Other people may not find it so. But when we took over JWT in '87, which was a so-called hostile transaction, although there is no such thing, as Jimmy Goldsmith said, it's not hostile to the shareholders, it's not hostile to the good people inside the business, certainly, and it's certainly not hostile to the clients. You want to keep it all together. It's only hostile to the then CEO of the company. But that took 14 days, and I always remember it finished on a Friday. It started on a Friday and finished on a Friday. And I came back to London overnight on BA, and a guy called Len Spooner was standing, so this is in '87, was standing at the Customs and Immigration with a copy of the Times, of the Saturday Morning Times, talking about how important newspapers are. And the front page story of the Times was, this wire basket manufacturer takes over, an icon of Madison Avenue. And it showed pictures of the Dartford wire works, of, the wire and plastic products thing. And my parents couldn't believe it because they lived in the East End, and the Times was, frankly, at that stage, in the 20s and the 30s, regarded as being sort of pretty anti-Semitic. And the thought that a nice Jewish boy, if I am a nice Jewish boy, could end up on the front page of the Times was something that they found absolutely bizarre and couldn't believe. So I think that sort of influenced me. The fact that when my mother died a few years ago, that was about 5 years ago, I went through her papers, and she had the wedding certificate of my grandparents on my father's side, both of whom came from the Ukraine. And so I am technically half Ukrainian, which is sort of interesting in light of recent developments. And there was the wedding certificate, and it had their names, and it had their signatures, and the signatures of 4 witnesses. None of the signatures were signatures, so they were all crosses. So there were 6 crosses on the wedding certificate, dated 1899. And I think these things do have influences on you. I think, you sometimes get written up as being the son of a wealthy, I would prefer middle class, northwest London Jewish home. It always says northwest London, not always, many times northwest London Jewish home, which it's very rarely you see northwest London Catholic home. You do see, or Protestant home. You do see sometimes Muslim, to be fair, So I always, that probably pushes you a bit.
Yeah.
And I think my father, I felt, always never fulfilled his promise. That he never had, he had to leave school at 13. He had a violin scholarship from the Royal School of Music. He could repeat tracts of Shakespeare. It was unbelievable. I don't know what, in those days, they didn't have the diversions of TV and iPads and God knows what, so I think they read the Talmud and they read Shakespeare. But I'm talking about chunks. I'm not talking about the odd line. And I used to do the English Speaking Union Scholarship prize with Simon Sharma, actually, every year. And you used to have to, part of it was you had a set prose thing that they gave you to read, but you also had a voluntary thing where you could do a speech. So Henry V of Agincourt, the Thomas of Becket speech, Henry II, whatever it happened to be. And my father, unbelievably, could recite these things like a parrot. Verbatim. And I've got a reasonably good memory. I always fluffed it in the ESU competition. I always forgot something, Julius Caesar's speech or whatever.
But you went on, unlike your father, you went on to have a really advanced education. What influence on your business career
It was because of him, because he pushed me to do that.
So what influence did your years at Cambridge have on you? Did you make lifelong friends?
I never really found my feet in Cambridge. I think I sort of wasted, I had 3 years there at Christ's with Simon. We both came from Haberdashers and both went up to Christ Cambridge. And I think I never really did it. And all my 3 sons have gone there to Cambridge, not to Christ, but to Peterhouse and Pembroke and Trinity Hall. And I feel they're much better organised than I was. I think if I can be sort of old manish about this, kids today are much better organised. So they're able to get a first and win a blue, whereas in our day the thing was sort of split. There were either blues or who were dummies, or there were did geography. Or I did geography to A level, or land economy was another one. I think the thing, whatever land economy means. And they couldn't do the other thing. But now, very, very much better organised. But I never found myself. I found myself at Harvard Business School, much to my mother's annoyance. My mother thought that I came back from HBS from Boston absolutely as an appalling individual. It was absolutely awful, and I picked up all the worst possible habits.
What influence did Simon Sharma have over you?
We were talking a little bit about that in the green room. I think unconscious. I mean, Simon and I met at Haberdashers when it was in Cricklewood, before it went to the fair climes of Elstree, to the verdant pastures of Elstree. And so I knew Simon from 11 till 18, and then we both went up to Cambridge in the same college together. So we were the first Jews who excused hall. Every day you'd have to go to hall, you had to put a gown on and go to hall, wear a tie and a jacket, and you have a full meal. We were allowed to cook in our own room on gas rings. I remember Simon, who always thinks to this day, he thinks he's a wonderful cook. He's certainly better than me, but I wouldn't put him in the, sort of Nigella category. Anyway, that's the right category to put him in. Getting into dangerous territory, I think. But we nearly burnt the college down once because Simon left our risotto sort of cooking on these gas rings that you used to have, and burnt right through the bottom of the saucepan, and his room was almost on fire. But we bonded. We went to the Democratic Convention. We reported in 64. We reported on the Democratic Convention in Atlantic City in 1964 for New Cambridge, which was the new newspaper there, becoming the more and more the newspaper. Susie Menkes was the editor of that at that time, and then the following year we decided to see the East. So we went to Czechoslovakia, which was then called Czechoslovakia. We went to Hungary. We went to East Berlin and West Berlin, of course. Went through Checkpoint Charlie, etc., and went to Vienna. So we saw the eastern side.
But he was an unconscious influence rather than someone who's.
I think Simon's always been. Yeah, I mean, Simon chose a different. He chose the academic route. He's been an outstanding academic. He's done, brilliant, in my view, brilliant TV programs. He's written brilliant books, but his chosen line was different to mine. I mean, his was academic, and mine was commercial. And although obviously the two things do mix together. But I think, it's an unconscious, I see him not as much as I would like to, but we see him on a fairly regular basis.
Was there a moment early in your career when you thought, goodness me, for the first time, I'm really influential? People actually have to listen to my decisions and are persuaded by me.
I don't feel that that's the case. I mean, I say this and sometimes people laugh. I mean, if I say go left inside our organisation, everybody goes right. So I figured out if I want them to go right, I say go left and they go right. And people laugh at that. Okay, not much of this audience has laughed at that. But usually, that's because you're all listening so intently to everything that I say.
I'm crying.
Yeah. But no, I don't think that way, actually. I wish it was the case. I mean, I am absorbed. Rufus mentioned, that we manage 75 billion of media. And what people don't understand about WPP, actually, is that is the engine room. The engine room, it's a bit like Oxford and Cambridge boat race on the weekend. It's a bit like those guys that sit in the middle of the boat, I can't know, but it's number 4 or 5 in the boat, whatever. They're the engine room, the big mothers, right? And that is influence. That is influence. And I think building that, and we've had a Group M has been an outstanding, after all, you went back to the 90s when Chris Jones and Shelley Lazarus were running JWT and Ogilvy, and the media departments were getting smaller and smaller as Chris Ingram and the Rodez family in Spain, and Dennis Hunt and Michael Kassan with Western International were all building independence. And people inside advertising agencies didn't realize how important the media side of the business was. And if you look at Mad Men, that's wonderful. There's a wonderful sequence where the media...
Have you watched all of Mad Men?
Yeah. And I'm waiting for the new series. I think it's coming out imminently, right? I've already got it keyed up in my iPad for downloading from Lionsgate. But you remember that the media, he wasn't called a media director. The media manager, whatever it is, walks into the room and sees two people there. One of them is one of the company, sort of the equivalent of a company secretary, woman who's been promoted to company secretary, and there's somebody else in the room, I think Don Draper. I said, basically says, why can't I be on the board? And that was that was one of the things that ran true, because media was regarded as being, that was the back end of the presentation. If the creatives or the planners went on for too long, media never got a voice because it fell off the back of the presentation bus. And the media director didn't get the corner office, they didn't get the Ferraris, it was the creative directors that did. That was a mistake, because the agencies didn't understand that was going on. On the other hand, that was a good thing, because what it did was focus our attention, and Mindshare was the combination of JWT and Ogilvy's media department, which, if we were not careful, we're going to disappear into oblivion.
Okay. If you're advising agencies now about how to build the influence of a particular brand, are there certain basic core principles about building influence?
Well, it's a really interesting question in this sense, that agency brands are important to the people who work in agencies. I don't think agency brands are as important to our clients or our customers as they used to be. I just came from Seattle, another example, but I mean, every pitch we're waiting to hear Vodafone's result, we're waiting to hear M&S's result. We had comparethemarket.com earlier in the week. I mean, we had Pepsi in China last week, which we were successful in the media. So, you look at all these things, it is increasingly becoming integrated. And no agency brand to date has it been able to do or to scale the breadth, if that's the right way of putting it, of what you have to do. So the groups, whether they be WPP or the putative POG or IPG or Dentsu Aegis, they are the full-service agencies of the 21st century. If you went to Berkeley Square, 40 Berkeley Square, at JWT in 1952 or 3, you would have found MRB Media Research, BMRB, a research company. You would have found Lexington PR, which is now part of Hill & Knowlton Public Relations. You would have seen, found planners, operational planning. They actually built the factory that made the Mr. Kipling's cakes. I mean, that's the operations research part of their business. So it was a mathematical, they're sort of the forerunners of the programmers and engineers that we have today. So, but these new groups, of which WPP is one, the key issue is integration. So when you say build the brand, you have this dichotomy, which you want strong brands, you want the best people running those brands, but at the same time, you want them to work together. And the real problem is that good people are more difficult to manage than average people.
Why is that?
Because good people are successful and opinionated as a result, and therefore very difficult to get somebody to get them to say, listen, or get them to understand that they should listen to other people. This is a really important point from my perspective. We started WPP in 1985 with 2 people in one room in Lincoln's Inn Fields. We therefore value anybody's opinion. Because my view is, if you think about WPP being, says 178,000 people in 110 countries, basically. If you think about the interactions, let's say that 2/3 of those people are, hopefully, at least, maybe, I would hope it was 3/4, or maybe even 80%, are client-facing and having interactions with clients every day. Just think about the information sources that you have there. If you can pull that information and pull that knowledge, that data, that understanding into a cohesive whole, you can, there's no competitor that can live with us. The problems are that we operate in these silos, we operate in these verticals, so we're building horizontals which are client leaders, so they manage, 41 of them manage 1/3 of our revenues, $6 billion, 35,000 people work on these accounts, and then at a country level, even more interestingly from my perspective, at a country level we're getting people to coordinate our businesses. They have no authority, so they don't undermine the authority of the verticals. They have no authority, but they have the responsibility of making sure we have the best people, of making sure we make the best acquisitions, of making sure that we work with the best local companies. The local companies are going to be the multinationals of the future. So the answer to your question is, sure, you want to build that brand. Sure, you want to advise them as to all the best things to do, and the most important thing is to invest in the right people, because that's the core of our business. We invest $12 billion a year in people out of $18 billion of revenue, and the flip side of that is we only invest $500 million in capital equipment. So our investment is in human capital. Getting that right is you've got to do by brand.
That's how you build.
But bringing them together is critical.
That's a trick.